Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be taking the drafts that you sent me, telling you what I like about them, telling you what I don't like about them, telling you how I think you could improve them, and also giving them an overall rating as well. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you are new around here, please do consider subscribing as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, last week I recorded a video rating your drafts and you guys always seem to really enjoy them and I want to rate as many of your drafts as possible. So I thought I'd have another really chilled video where in more like a live stream format, I kind of just go through your drafts, give them a rating and tell you some of my thoughts around them. But because I also want to help you become better managers as well, because that's kind of the motto of my channel. I don't tell you what to do. I try and provide information and explain my thought process in the hope to allow you to improve your own decision making and to improve your FPL ranks too. I thought I'd also kind of like write out my thought process as to how I'm giving the rating as well. So I've got what do I like about the draft, but also what don't I like, as well as my own rating, and then the hub rating as well. And what that hub rating is Fantasy Football Hub, a fantasy football website with loads of really useful tools. They actually offer free AI rating. So an AI rates your team for free. So if you are not one of the 8 people that are having their drafts rated today by me, you can get your own draft rated for free. I'll flash it up on your screen. Basically, all you have to do is upload a screenshot. You don't have to sign in or anything like that. Upload a screenshot of your team and it will give you a rating out of 100. Click the link in the description, the first link. Do that and let me know down below in the comments what was your score out of 100 when you uploaded that screenshot. And if you do want access to all of their other insane tools that they've got, touch maps, player comparisons, expert articles, Opta statistics, that's really difficult to say, Opta statistics, you can get 50% off at the moment for as little as £3.25 per month it works out as. You can get access to all of that stuff that I've just mentioned and more. So do check out the first and second link in the description. So, for draft number 1, I would say this might be the most popular structure at the moment, and it's a Haaland and Salah draft. And I didn't expect this to become so popular so quickly. I kind of knew that by around game week 1, or at least in the lead up to game week 1, everyone that had Haaland and that had Salah and didn't have Haaland, they'd start to think, oh, I kind of want to squeeze Erling Haaland into my team. And it would be that kind of fear that would force us to try and squeeze the 2 in. But I didn't expect it to happen this far out from game week 1. But we've run some polls on Twitter, and as many as 50 to 55% of people now have both Salah and Haaland in their team. And I'd love to know down below in the comments, do you have the 2 of them in? So I thought it'd be a good place to start. Is it worth squeezing them in? What do I like about it? So obviously, I'm not saying this is the best Salah and Haaland draft that you can build. You might feel like your one is better. But the things that I do like, firstly, you can afford any player in the game, or at least in midfield and attack in one move, because you've got the most expensive midfielder and the most expensive forward. So let's say Palmer absolutely pops off in the first 2 game weeks. We'll just do Salah to Palmer, and you've got 2 mil to spend. I know you might not want to downgrade Salah, but you've got that option there. Let's say Watkins goes absolutely nuclear in the first couple of game weeks, scores against West Ham, gets a brace against Arsenal, and Haaland is struggling a little bit, well then yeah, you just do Haaland to Watkins. It's much easier to downgrade than it is to upgrade. It's a cliche saying in FPL, but it's so true. It's why often, pretty much every season I'd say, I tend to start with the most expensive defender, midfielder and forward. Now you can get Trent, Salah, Haaland and do that. And then you can afford any player in the game in one move. But getting Trent in as well as those 2, you do end up having to sacrifice quite a lot in your team. So I can understand why this person hasn't gone for Trent as well. The other massive advantage is that you own the 2 best captaincy options every single week pretty much. Now, there are options like Isak in game week 1, but I would say most weeks you're going to captain one of those 2. And you can decide that week by week. You don't have to worry about moving players around to try and get the best captaincy option. Now, having the choice isn't always a great thing. It might be that Salah outscores Haaland in game week 2. It could easily happen. I don't think it will, but it could happen. And if I don't have Haaland, well, then I don't really have the choice, right? I just captain Salah again, and that might end up actually helping me. But I think more often than not, you'd probably rather have the choice. The other thing I like about this draft in particular, there are 4 penalty takers in Salah, Isak, Haaland, and Eze. And Nkunku and Wood could take penalties at points, but they're not first choice. So I like to try and squeeze as many penalty takers in as possible. And later on in this video, there is a draft with 8 penalty takers that I absolutely love. And I would try and get as many in as possible. So I like that. And the other thing I like is the Arsenal defence and the Man City defence are both covered as well, which is a real bonus because they are the 2 best defences in the league. And Arsenal in particular, most Haaland and Salah drafts I've seen, they don't have the Arsenal cover. So I like the fact that there are 2 Arsenal assets in this draft. So those are all the things I like. But as you can see, I've only rated it at 88%. What don't I like about this? Firstly, I think there are quite a few possible rotation risks. Martinelli and Livramento stick out at the moment as the biggest two because Trossard has been excellent for Arsenal. There are rumours they might be trying to sign another winger as well. Livramento, if Trippier does leave, he could be and probably will be first choice, but that hasn't happened yet. And so the closer we get to game week 1, if Trippier still hasn't left, yes, the transfer window will still be open and maybe he will in game week 2, game week 3, but I wouldn't feel comfortable having Livramento unless Trippier has completely left England or at least left Newcastle United. So for me, Livramento and Martinelli are big risks at the moment. And you could argue that Nkunku and Wood are as well. Now, I think Nkunku and Wood are both first choice, and Nkunku in particular, I can't see him being benched much this season, but his fitness has been an issue. And with Chris Wood, as much as I like him as an option, Awoniyi has joined Nottingham Forest for their tour, and he is a fantastic forward, much younger than Chris Wood. There is a chance that they start to favour him in the league sometimes over Chris Wood. So I would say at this stage, you've now got 4 possible rotation risks. You could even arguably chuck Gvardiol in there as a rotation risk. I just don't think you want to start stacking them up. I think wherever possible, you want to get as many now players at the start of the season when you can. The big issue that I have with this draft, and it's the big issue that I have with Haaland and Salah drafts in general, whilst I said that you do have flexibility because you own the most expensive midfielder and the most expensive forward, the flexibility you don't have is that if you don't want to sell Salah, let's say Salah is doing really well, but you also want to squeeze in one of Saka, Foden, Palmer, or Son, or maybe even Kevin De Bruyne, it's difficult with this draft. How do you genuinely do that? Let's think about it. If you wanted to squeeze in, let's say Saka was doing really well or Palmer was doing really well, the only way I can see here is you have to sell Salah. Because your money is spread between those two, and again, many people will start without one of them, which makes a lot of sense, but I just find it a little bit more difficult to try and squeeze in one of those sort of semi-premium midfielders priced between like 9.5 and 10.5 without having to sell Salah, which you might not want to do. So I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of flexibility given that you own Salah and then a lot of cheaper midfielders, and there's no one at that sort of mid-price between, like I said, 9.5 and 10.5. And then the other thing, I think the defence is quite low upside, other than Gvardiol and Livramento, and I know that's 2 of your defenders, but let's say that Livramento is a bit of a rotation risk, you don't want to go there. Gvardiol also is a small rotation risk too. Anderson and Van de Ven, they don't feel like the highest upside picks. I do like Anderson. I think it's the Van de Ven pick I'm not so sure about. Yes, you cover a different defence that not many people will cover, but, and I don't want to put you off, but he had 0.03 XGI last season. I think he was in the bottom 10 defenders that played a significant amount of minutes last season for attacking threat. And I know he scored a couple of goals, but he's not really shown that he's going to do that on a consistent basis if you look at the underlying data. So I do wonder if you can just choose a slightly higher upside £4.5 million defender potentially to put into that team that might rotate slightly better with your other defenders as well. So there you go. I've rated it at 88%. Fantasy Football Hub have rated it at 90%. Let me know down below in the comments, how would you rate this Haaland and Salah draft? So, draft number 2 is arguably the most unique and innovative of the video, and it's a bench boost game week 1, wildcard game week 2 draft. And I absolutely love it because it is so unique. Now, would I waste 2 of my chips? Well, not waste. Would I use 2 of my chips immediately in game week 1 and game week 2? Maybe not, but you could get off to such a hot start. And often in FPL, it can be relatively easy to protect a lead in a mini league and also your rank as well. All you have to start doing, if you start the season well, is just make sure you own the highly owned players. So starting from a point of having a high rank can be quite a useful way to start the season. And if you get this right, you could even be in like the top 1K, top 100 in the world if the bench boost and the wild card pay dividends for you. So the idea of this draft is attack those game week 1 fixtures, pick players that could maybe only even start in game week 1 or that we think look very likely to, load up the bench with really high upside picks as well, and then wildcard out of that in game week 2 to the likes of Chelsea, to the likes of Man City, who don't have a perfect game week 1 fixture. So listen, I fully understand the logic to it, and it does make a lot of sense, but you are using 2 of your chips. So what do I like? Like I said, extremely innovative and unique. Excellent differential options in this draft. So there are a few I like and there are a few I don't like, but I think Hudson-Odoi is a really nice pick, especially if it looks likely that it will start game week 1, which I think he will. Brennan Johnson, I think, should start game week 1, depending upon who Spurs sign. He's one of my favourite £6.5 million mids if he gets good minutes, but you only need him for game week 1 in this case. Solanke is a really nice option that not many people are talking about on penalties. Could definitely do a job in game week 1. Gakpo, if he looks likely to start, or Darwin, whoever it is, Jota, if you can get them in. These would all be nice differentials. Even Erdegaard, I would probably argue, is a differential. So The team is actually loaded up with differential options that I really like. I'd say it's a pretty well-balanced squad. It's got a pretty good structure, and you're obviously making the most of the fixtures. So there are tons of things to really like about this. And people might wonder why Tsimikas is in there. There are rumours going around that Robertson might not quite make the start of the season. Yes, it could be Joe Gomez, but also Tsimikas could get the nod. So I like this. It's very risky. It's high upside, and it could pay off. But what don't I like? Well, the first thing is bench boosting with rotation risks, especially in Game Week 1 when there's a few unknowns. It's never ideal because all you need is one or two of your players to not feature. Let's say you thought Tsimikas was going to start, but Joe Gomez does, and you thought Hudson-Odoi was going to play, but actually he's injured randomly and you just didn't find that out, or Elanga starts instead. Well, all of a sudden, that bench boost looks really, really weak. And I think, especially in Game Week 1, there are quite a few things that we don't quite know exactly how the teams will line up. And especially once you start chucking in some rotation risks in there as well. I probably wouldn't bench boost unless I was really confident that all 15 of my players would start. So I'd probably try to switch out the likes of Tsimikas for a sure starter. The likes of Dan Burn, who I think will start, but isn't nailed on by any means. I just tidy up a few of those rotation risks for me personally. And then I wonder, is Game Week 2 wildcard, is that the best time to use your wildcard? Well, the answer is almost definitely not, right? Because you've just had a wildcard, essentially, at the start of the season. So using a wildcard after 1 week is not the best time to play a wildcard, by any means. So I wonder could you not still do the bench boost 1, right? You could still bench boost in Game Week 1, but could you not still have a couple of players there that you could carry forward? Even if you wildcarded in Game Week 4, I think that's a lot better than Game Week 2. I just think Game Week 2 is such a waste because, like I said, you've essentially just had a wild card anyway. I also think there are better picks in that defence. I don't think Luke Shaw is probably the best pick at 5 mil. I don't mind the opening fixture, but looks like Lenny Euro could be out for a couple of months. Who's going to be starting for United? Is it like Martinez and Maguire? I don't fully trust that United defence still. And I don't think Dan Burn's the best pick, personally. Because I think if he does start, there's a good chance it's at centre-back. And if it's not at centre-back because Kelly starts there, well, then he's a bit of a rotation risk with Lewis Hall. So, or Livramento if he's playing at left-back. So I think there are probably slightly better defenders to pick as well. But in general, I've been very harsh giving it 76% because it's unique. It should absolutely bang in Game Week 1. And then you can pick whatever team you want for Game Week 2 with lots of Chelsea, City, and maybe even loading up with Aston Villa on your bench ahead of Game Week 3, for example. It could work really well. I'm just not sure I'd want to use 2 chips so early. Fantasy Football Hub, obviously not taken into account when you play the chips and the fact that you've just essentially wasted 2 chips or used them very early. They've rated it at 89%, so they don't mind it as much as me. Let me know down below, do you like this unique approach, or are you just like, no, the chips are being played way too early here? So guys, I absolutely love draft number 3, and there's a very good chance I'm on something quite similar myself for Game Week 1 because it has a lot of what I like, and there's very few limitations to it, to be honest, but this is the 8 penalty takers draft. So that's right. At the time of me recording, I believe that all 8 of these are on penalties. The person that sent it in actually said this is a 7 penalty taker draft, and I assume they meant that you can only obviously start 7 of them. But as far as I'm aware, all 8 are. Salah might not be, given that he's not got the best penalty record, but I just think he's just that guy, and he's going to want to take penalties still. So I expect him to still be on them. Palmer didn't miss last season, scored an absolute hatful, obviously for England as well. So you'd expect Palmer to keep them. Eze, there was some question marks whether Elise might take them last season, but Eze should be on pens. Bruno Fernandes absolutely will be. Gibbs White we think will be, but Chris Wood could take them. Isak will be because Wilson's not fit and available, and I still think Isak's first choice anyway. He actually took one last season when Wilson was on the pitch. João Pedro on penalties as well, as far as we're aware. Pascal Gross is officially, or is in the process of leaving Brighton. That would be the only concern for me there. And Armstrong will be on penalties for Southampton as well. He is the 8th penalty taker that is currently sat on the bench. So you've got 8 penalty takers, and therefore the first thing that I like about this is obviously that fact, because it increases your routes to points so much. Your team could have an absolute stinker. You could have 6 of your 7 attackers just drop stinkers. They get booked, they're terrible, they're missing chances, but 4 of them score penalties, and you could still get a green arrow. And that happened to me on occasions last season when my team was stinking it up a bit. But there was 2 or 3 weeks in a row where I was just getting penalty after penalty after penalty. I remember Mbermo at the start of last season, he had 2 penalties himself, didn't he? And then loads of people started to bring him in because his price went up because he'd scored these penalties. He himself was actually missing quite a lot of big chances, but penalty takers just get you extra points because of the pens. So I always like, wherever possible, to pick them. I would never pick someone just because they're on penalties, But if I'm looking at option A and option B and it's very close, even if I may be 51% in favour of option B, but option A is on penalties, I'll often lean that way because you get the extra points. Why not try and increase your routes to points? Or it's the same if a player is on free kicks and corners. That's another major advantage. The other thing I like about this draft is there are excellent price points in the midfield. I like the fact that you've got Salah at 12.5, Palmer at 10.5, Bruno at 8.5, Eze at 7, Gibbs White at 6.5. You've got every major price point covered if you wanted to pivot to another player that you didn't consider and maybe they are starting to do very well. And so I really like all of that. I like the fact it's got very strong bench cover. You've got Armstrong and Konsa on the bench. You've got 3 premium defenders as well. Raya, Trent, and Gvardiol, which means limited transfers are going to be needed in that defense because you could conceivably keep them for a while. So, I mean, it's very, very strong. What don't I like? Why isn't this getting 100% if it's got all of these great things? Firstly, whilst João Pedro and Armstrong rotate very well, and they are both on penalties as far as I'm aware, they're obviously not outstanding picks, otherwise they wouldn't be priced at 5.5. So every single week you are relying on a 5.5 million pound player. And whilst, like I said, the fixtures might rotate in such a way where they've got a good fixture each week, you'd ideally like to not have a 5.5 million pound player in your starting 11. You'd ideally, again, you would have unlimited budget, but if you can get around it, and you probably can with a slightly different structure, for example, if you dropped Bruno to Gordon, could you then upgrade João Pedro to... You could get into someone like a Gakpo, potentially, or maybe up to Havertz if you downgraded Armstrong, for example. You'd have to move around the budget a little bit, but is it possible to just move away from having such a weak or cheap spot in your team, potentially? There are also no Man City and no Arsenal attackers, and this is probably the major issue with this draft. Yes, you've got Raya, yes, you've got Gvardiol, so you're covering those 2 defences, but no Saka, no Foden, no Haaland, no Ødegaard. And also, I think there are better picks than Burn, like I said, at 4.5, so I'd probably move him out personally myself. I really like it. I've got it at 94%. Fantasy Football Hub at 93%. It's very close. And I, at the moment, have been on a very similar structure to this for most of my drafts. So another draft type that is gaining a lot of momentum is the no-mo draft, and that is what we have for draft number 4. Basically, no Mohamed Salah, only has Haaland as the premium, or the very expensive premium. And to be honest, I think having Haaland or Salah is basically the flip of a coin. I think they're very, very similar. I think they'll both have good seasons. You'd probably expect Haaland to slightly outperform Salah, but then he's 2.5 more. And it's whether you think you can spend that 2.5 elsewhere that would mean that Salah plus 2.5 can outscore Haaland draft, obviously without the extra money. And I think it's very, very close at the moment for me. And the reason I picked this draft is because there's also a couple of nice differentials in there. We've got Udogie at 5. If he's fit and available for the start of the season, which it looks like he should be, I really like him as an option, obviously cheaper than Pedro Porro. Murillo as the centre-back for Nottingham Forest. They've got really good fixtures, and he's just got a bit about him. I can imagine him getting a couple of attacking returns this season. And Forest were 4th for expected goals conceded in the Premier League last season. The 4th best defence for the amount of chances that they conceded. So we're talking about a good defence with good fixtures. Nottingham Forest defence is still going under the radar, even with the additional picks that we're seeing with players now. I like the midfield as well. Smith Rowe is now going to Fulham at 5.5 million with Fulham's opening fixtures. If he looks likely to start most weeks, Smith Rowe is going to be an excellent option at 5.5. Garnacho at 6.5. I really like Garnacho's goal threat is one of the best for the 6.5 million pound midfielders. So I really like this draft because it's a Haaland draft, but there are also scattered a couple of nice differential options in there. And I also like it because Saka's in there as well. If you're going for a Haaland draft, I think you've got to have one of Saka or Palmer for me. Maybe Foden if it looks like he'll be back and available, or Heung-min Son, by the way, who I just still forget to mention in most videos, but I really like Sonny as an option. But one of those kind of 10 to 10.5 million pound midfielders, just for structural purposes, because let's say you get it wrong and actually Salah smashes it, but you don't want to sell Haaland, right? Because obviously you could just sell Haaland and upgrade anyone to get to Salah. But let's say you want to keep Haaland, but you also do want to squeeze Salah in as well. If you go for a draft like this, you're only 2.5 million off of doing Saka to Salah. And I say only, that's still going to require a couple of transfers to get there, but you're closer than if you were to go for one more premium defender, and rather than Saka, you had someone like Ødegaard or Bruno Fernandes. Well, then you're like 4 million off of getting to Salah. So I like the fact that they've got that price point in there. I like Trent being in there as the only premium defender because he's the most expensive, but also, in my opinion, the best. And I really like the two 5.5 attackers. They rotate quite well. They don't rotate perfectly, but Smith Rowe and João Pedro rotate quite well, where you can play one of them in most weeks. So it's a really strong draft. What don't I like about it? Well, there's no Liverpool attacking coverage. So if Liverpool absolutely pop off and start scoring goals for fun under Arnie Slot, you've got no one there. So I do wonder, could you do something like Soboslai in for Garnacho at 6.5 if you don't want to go for an attacker, obviously one of the forwards like Gakpo? Maybe you could squeeze in Jota for Gordon, but I think Soboslai for Garnacho could be a really nice transfer there. There's also no Chelsea players here. And they actually have really good fixtures from Game Week 2. I know that Game Week 1 fixture's off-putting, but I wonder, it's still in that Garnacho spot. Could Nkunku maybe be the one to come in for Garnacho? And then on Garnacho, he's probably the only player here that I'd say is a real doubt for Game Week 1, just based on the fact that he's obviously having an extended break given that Argentina won the Copa America. He should be back in time for Game Week 1. But even if he is back in time, he's not going to have had a full load of training session in comparison to some of the other players. You could absolutely see Manchester United doing something like Rashford and Ahmad or Rashford and Sancho on the wings in Game Week 1 and just giving Garnacho slightly more rest and slightly more time to get back up to speed at Man United. So it's a very nice draft. I've given it 87%. Just simply because I think there are a couple of players that I might not want in there as much. And I slightly prefer the Salah drafts at the moment, but it's only ever so slight. Fantasy Football Hub have given it 91% as a rating. They like it a lot. So for draft number 5, I've called this the Chelsea attack draft. It's not just because of the Chelsea attack I wanted to show you it, but it just had a couple of things that I wanted to point out that I actually really liked a lot. One of which is the Chelsea attack. So many people are going to be put off of that Manchester City fixture in Game Week 1 that they won't pick any Chelsea players, as we saw in the previous draft. And I don't like that because you are building for the long term as well as obviously Game Week 1. The other thing to note is I would argue Palmer is probably, yes, he's more expensive, but the best kind of semi-premium, I'll call him again, less than Salah and Haaland. I think probably Palmer is better than Saka and Foden for me. And I would argue Nkunku is the best £6.5 million midfielder, right? So if I've got Palmer as the best around £10 million midfielder, and I've got Nkunku as the best 6.5, why should I be scared to put both of them in? Because they are two different players. I know you've then got a double up against City in Game Week 1, which isn't ideal, but you could even play Rodgers in this draft instead. I just think it makes a lot of sense to have the pair of them. And I'm getting increasingly more tempted to have both Nkunku and Palmer. Obviously, all of your eggs are in the Chelsea basket. And if they start really poorly, that is two very valuable midfield spots that you've lost. But I quite like that element. The other element that I like to this draft is the Menez and Rodgers rotation. And I wanted to draw your attention to this because it works very well. If you want to go for Rodgers or you want to go for Menez, but you realise you don't want to start them every week, if you pair them together, most weeks you have a very good fixture. And if one of them starts to do so well that fixtures don't matter, well, then you can just start them most weeks. But especially in those opening fixtures, in Game Week 2 when Rodgers has Arsenal, Menez has Leicester or Ipswich, I think it's Leicester, and you can rotate them really nicely. So I like the idea of having Menez and Rodgers in there as two cheap players to rotate. I also really like the defence on this draft as well. I mean, the only issue with a draft like this, no Man City attackers. And I think Havertz is a slight rotation risk with Gabriel Jesus this season. I know we didn't really see that last season, and Havertz was excellent. And he can play as the 8 as well as the number 9. But I think this season, Havertz won't play quite as many minutes if Jesus can stay fit, because people are speaking very highly about Jesus around Arsenal. He looks like he's back to full fitness, and he won't just sit on the bench all season. So I worry slightly about Arsenal. And so if you remove Havertz, you've then got no Arsenal attackers and no City attackers, and they are the two best attacks in the league. So maybe you could do something like switch Havertz to Ødegaard. It could be that you downgrade Mikalenko to someone like Barco, and in doing that, that would allow you to do Havertz into the midfield for Ødegaard, but then you don't have that Menez-Rodgers rotation. So yeah, a brief one here, because I just wanted to show you, I like the idea of Nkunku and Palmer together, and that Menez and Rodgers rotation could work very nicely. I've rated it at 90%, and Fantasy Football Hub agree. So for draft number 6, we're getting a lot of the same kind of players now, so we can start to speed up, but it's just making subtle tweaks, and I kind of want to discuss it with you. I know I always ask you questions down below, but feel free to comment on any of these, because I am interested to see what the general thought process and the consensus is on these drafts, because this is a very similar-ish draft to what we've seen before, but you look at it and you go, wow, that midfield and defence. And the reason for that is the bench is virtually non-existent, but you've also starting two very cheap forwards. So you've got João Pedro and Wood both starting, and both starting pretty much every week. But what that allows you is Raya, Mikalenko, Gvardiol, Trent, which is arguably the best defence you can get because you're covering Arsenal, City and Liverpool and also getting a really solid 4.5 there. And then in midfield, not only do you have Salah, but you've got Palmer and Saka in there. So both of them, plus Anthony Gordon. It's not even like you then have like a Rodgers in there. That midfield four is exceptional, plus Isak. So all you are sacrificing, and you might not even say it's sacrifice, is those two forward spots. You've got to go for two cheaper players. Now, this person here has João Pedro and Wood. Obviously, it could be Armstrong. It could be Muniz if you wanted to. But the issue is, with a draft like this, because your bench is so cheap, you essentially have to play them every single week. So I've said what I don't like about this is that, number one, you need João Pedro and Wood, who are both slight minutes risks, maybe João Pedro slightly more so. You need them to both start every week. But also, João Pedro's got Manchester United and Arsenal in game week 2 and 3. And you might not see Manchester United as a huge issue, but Arsenal's not a fixture you want to play him in. And the issue that you've got is Barco, who sat on the bench. He's the one that you would want to sub in because he looks like he's going to start the season for Brighton, maybe even at left wing back. But he's going to have the same fixtures as João Pedro. So in the week that you wouldn't want to play João Pedro, you're not going to really have a fantastic sub to come on. So I love the idea of a draft where you can get a really good defence, Palmer, Salah, Saka, Isak, and maybe even a really good fourth midfielder. But the way that I would make this better, and the reason it's at 86% according to me, is I just don't think you can rely on João Pedro and Wood ever. I think you're going to come unstuck very, very quickly with a draft like this. So what would I do? I would downgrade Gordon to someone like Gibbs, White, Nkunku, Bailey, who are probably my three favourite £6.5 million midfielders. And that would give you 1 million. Now, what you do with that 1 million is up to you. Do you upgrade maybe that Chris Wood spot, try and get him up to a 7.5 or maybe even an 8? Or what is probably more useful is upgrading that bench slightly. So you could go from a £4.5 million midfielder to someone like Hudson-Odoi, Semenyo, Andreas, Smith-Rowe. I think personally a 6.5 and then a 5.5 on the bench to rotate in is probably stronger for you than Gordon and a 4.5. So if you were to do, like I said, Gordon to Gibbs-White, or Nkunku or Bailey, and then do Winks to Andreas or Smith-Rowe, you could then rotate that player in for João Pedro when his fixtures aren't great, as we spoke about in the previous rotation as well. Or you could have, like I said, a Rodgers in there, a Hudson-Odoi. You've got lots of options, but I just think the bench is too weak for you to also be starting with two cheap forwards. But this draft's actually very close to being very good. And the idea that you can get Palmer, Salah and Saka into a draft without it looking too weak for a lot of the other players, I really like it. And in fact, Fantasy Football Hub have this rated at 96%. This is the highest rated draft of the video. It's just because that starting 11 is so strong if they start. And I understand it. In game week 1, it looks super strong as well. It's a good draft, to be honest. So draft number 7 is a pretty much completely differential draft because we've just looked at 6 teams where, yes, there are different structures, different choice of premiums, and there are quite a few different players, but they're also the same players that pop up over and over again. And there aren't complete differentials in this draft. It's not like every single one is a different player, but I would say at least 6 of the starting 11 I'm not seeing in many teams. So what do I love? It's independent thinking. It's being creative. It's the ability to have fun with FPL. I spoke about in yesterday's video how having fun with FPL is the most important thing. And I look at this. This is a fun team. There are tons of really nice picks here. I've listed the ones that I really like as differentials. And I don't even think they're just being different for the sake of it. Heung-min Son, fantastic always. Unless they sign Ivan Toney Spurs, in which case he's pushed out to the left and probably off penalties. So I wouldn't choose him then. But other than that, love Heung-min Son. Leicester and Everton as the opening 2. On penalties at the moment, looks really good. Mbeumo, completely overlooked by pretty much everyone. If Tony leaves, he'll be on penalties, you'd imagine. Decent opening fixture because it's at home. You could do a lot worse than Mbeumo. Szoboszlai, I spoke about already. Really like him if he starts as the number 10 for Liverpool. Munoz at 5 million, I still think is probably the best £5 million defender for me. Leon Bailey, not in many teams because most people are going for Nkunku and Gibbs White or a much cheaper midfielder. Lewis Dunk, if you can rotate him in and out, he's got some decent fixtures and he's got a lot of attacking threat too. So there are some really nice picks in here that just aren't being picked by other people. And also, you've got tons of bench cover. In this draft, you've got Miguel, you've got Bailey, you've got Dunk, and you've got Robinson currently sat on your bench. They are all starting players, and they're all likely to get you good minutes and potentially attacking returns too. So there's lots of bench cover. What don't I like? Well, as you can see, there's no Haaland and there's no Salah. So this is kind of like a neither draft. And I'll have my own neither draft on Friday. So make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel because that will be coming out on Friday. And I'll show you, is it viable to go without the two of them? But because you've gone without and you've also spread the money, you can't really get to either very easily. Even if you wanted to try and get Salah in, you'd need 3 million to go from De Bruyne to Salah. Well, so you'd have to downgrade Son to like Eze, which isn't awful, but then you're losing Son and De Bruyne and it's 2 transfers. If you wanted to get to Haaland, it's virtually impossible because not only if you spread the money across your starting 11, but also across your bench as well. And the issue with that is that I don't think there are many reliable captaincy options here every week. Son, if he's got a good fixture, you'd probably feel okay captaining, depending upon how Spurs look. Isak is okay in game week 1, but I'm not sure you want to captain him regularly unless he starts really strong. And so I would want one of them at least, just for the captaincy reason. But I understand why. And listen, this is a really fun draft. If De Bruyne does end up staying, which looks extremely likely, and he starts in game week 1, he could do very well. And then Ipswich in game week 2, I don't mind it as a draft. For me, I've given it 83%. I just think there are slightly too many differentials and slightly too many risks with respect to the structure. The bench needs weakening a little bit for me. It's too strong. And I would like to squeeze one of Salah or Haaland in just for reliability of captaincy. Fantasy Football Hub don't hate it either at 87%. And I just wanted to say, thank you for actually sending me a draft, which is different because I received, in the first tweet that I did last week, 1,000 drafts. And in this latest one, at the time of me recording, there are over 900. So I've seen almost 2,000 teams. And there are a lot of the same players being picked. And this one stood out to me because there are some really exciting differentials. So I hope you manage to keep them in your team for game week 1. So draft number 8 is, in my opinion, the best team at the moment. Now, I'm not saying every single player here, but in terms of structure, the rough personnel, this is roughly what I'm on at the moment in most of my drafts, and therefore I've given it 99%. It's not too dissimilar to the penalty takers draft that we showed. It's just, in my opinion, slightly more balanced because there's slightly less money in the defense, which allows you to spread the money a little bit more evenly across the attack. So what do I like about this? Why is this draft so good? Well, in the defence, you've got Trent and Gvardiol, and then you've got Miguel and Mikalenko, 2 players from good teams with good defensive data at cheap prices to partner with Trent and Gvardiol, who for me are the best 2 premiums. So in terms of structure, I know you don't have an Arsenal defender, but that is probably the best defensive structure you can get to allow you to spend big in the attack. You've then got midfielders at every price point, similar to the draft that I spoke about in the penalty takers one. You've got Salah, you've got Saka, Gordon, Eze and Nkunku. You've sort of staggered the pricing so that you've got a few different options there. You've got 4 very good captaincy options because you've got Saka, Salah, Isak and Watkins, all of whom are pretty reliable captaincy options in most weeks, not all weeks. And I think you're attacking the early fixtures really well here because you've got double Liverpool, you've got a Chelsea option, you've got a Forest option, and you've got double Newcastle as well. So I look at this and I think the fixtures are being attacked really well. Obviously, the issue is you've got no Arsenal defence, you've got no City attack, so there are gaps there, of course. You've got no Cole Palmer in this draft, who I just think is going to be really good this season, but you do cover him with Nkunku, who is a very good alternative. And also, I would say this is really being picky at this stage, but it's explaining why I haven't given it 100. You've got 3 of your starting 7 attackers aren't on penalties. So Gordon doesn't take pens, Nkunku won't take pens, and Watkins won't take pens. And whilst I'm not saying you can only pick penalty takers, but I would try and get penalty takers in if you can because they tend to deliver the points. And that might be a slight limitation to this, that there aren't as many penalty takers there. But in general, it's a super strong draft. And I think this is a very good structure to go with at the moment. If you prefer Haaland to Salah, well, you can simply just do Haaland in for Stewart and then Salah down to a 4.5. And then you just have to downgrade Saka to like an Erdegaard or something like this and make one more. But this is one of the reasons why I think having Salah rather than Haaland makes more sense for that extra 2.5. Or you just drop Ollie Watkins, go for Haaland in that Watkins spot, which gives you 6 million you need to find, and Salah can become Szoboszlai. So I think the math works out on that. Sorry if it doesn't. But yeah, Watkins to Haaland and Salah to Szoboszlai with exactly the same team also works fine. I just think, I mean, let me know down below, actually. I think the maths is correct on that. Is Salah and Watkins better than Szoboszlai and Haaland? It is for me, and this is why I have Salah in my drafts at the moment as opposed to Haaland, but I don't think there's a massive amount in it. And obviously, you could go for a different £6.5 million midfielder if you wanted to. So there we go. This is the rough draft that I'm on at the moment. I'll give you an updated draft video probably next week now. I don't want to spam you with too many of my updated drafts, but I like this a lot, and I think you would be set fine in game week 1 and beyond if you went for something similar to this. So guys, there you have it. That is my video trying to improve your FPL drafts and explaining my thought process around what I like and what I don't like. And hopefully that has been helpful for you. And if it has, please do smash that like button. Let's aim for 1,500 likes on today's video. And if you've watched to this point and you're not yet subscribed, please do consider doing so. And also check out Fantasy Football Hub. Like I said, you can get your team rated for free. You might as well do that. Upload a screenshot and then just delve into the site a little bit more. And if you do want 50% off, there is a second link in the description to get that discount. It supports me, but I also think it's a pretty cool site as well. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.